So, today I want to talk about Congress intervening in the Railroad Workers Union negotiations. In a sobering reminder that the majority of politicians in the United States will always take the side of capital and the business class, Congress has passed a law enforcing a contract onto railroad workers. Naturally, this contract does not include the biggest demands of the workers, namely paid sick leave and proper scheduling, which flat out means that Congress and President Biden, who of course signed the bill into law, have upheld the interests of railroad corporations over the needs of workers, despite the lip service that they consistently offer to the plight of these very same workers. The workers were likely to consider striking by December 9th. And instead of allowing the workers to continue to leverage their power against the abuses of corporations, Congress and President Biden have chosen to enforce the violence of the state and declare the potential strike illegal. A strike that, I remind you, has yet to begin because of delays caused by the state itself. Now, while a number of members of Congress may very well have tried to get paid sick leave to these workers through an additional piece of legislation, which naturally failed, the fact remains that the Biden administration, through its own powers in the Railway Labor Act via the Presidential Emergency Board, could have forced the issue in negotiations as early as September and made sure that these workers got the time off that they need and deserve. The contract that was enforced on these workers was the very one designed through that 60-day process, a process that the Biden administration had a hand in and thus could have shaped differently before an amendment process was ever even necessary. This is the very same tentative agreement that prompted President Biden to declare that a strike had been averted in mid September before the workers ever even had a chance to see it or vote on it. Now, I understand that the interest of the state here is to preserve its economic interests first and foremost, and that means that the state wants to do anything possible to avoid a strike. However, that leaves open a choice, one which Biden had the choice to make, to take a side on. And Biden has made the choice that is the anti labor one. And it is evident at this point that this is the contract that the Biden administration wanted to enforce on these workers, especially given how many chances he had to intervene on behalf of workers up to and including this point, where he could have vetoed the bill passed by Congress if it did not contain the necessary workdays. There's no room for excuses here anymore at this point. President Biden has revealed the reality that a majority of people on the left have known for quite some time. His interests lie in supporting corporations, not workers. In addition to all of this, the Railway Labor Act created several cooldowns that continuously stopped the momentum of workers. Even the original 60-day negotiated contract was designed to use the power of the law to keep unions at the table instead of the picket line. Nearly every legal step in this process has tried to prevent workers from leveraging the full extent of their power through striking. Additionally, before that first 60-day period, an overwhelming majority of workers, well over 90% in several of the union's cases, made it so that the vote was in favor of striking. Now, afterwards, after the contract had been gone through the government process, those numbers dropped significantly. And while I'm sure some will naively point to this and make the claim that the contract was apparently acceptable to many workers, the reality is that many knew that this contract was the best they were going to be allowed to get by government, and they already foresaw this outcome well in advance, because this has happened before. And why wouldn't they believe this? Especially as the delays pushed past the decision and pushed the decision off further and further past the midterm elections to a point where politicians didn't have to be held even to the most minute levels of accountability. Of course, those very same elected officials, in passing this law, have enabled and empowered the very same railroad corporations who created these circumstances in the first place by laying off over 40,000 workers in recent years, leaving workers with no new contract during the course of the pandemic, and fighting back against every basic quality of life necessity that the workers demanded and wanted, and that would have enabled workers to be able to take a day off for a wedding, a funeral, or even just take a sick day for themselves. The railroad corporations, not the workers, created the conditions for a strike by abusing and mistreating workers as these industries often tend to do. They understaffed trains, they forced longer hours, and they created punitive conditions in the name of efficiency under their so called precision scheduled railroading. Meanwhile, they labeled these workers essential during the pandemic. They rely on these workers for their record breaking profits that consistently keep going up every year. And it is the workers, not the CEOs, who are required to show up to their shifts in order to avoid billions of dollars in damages to the US economy. Again, it is the workers who hold the power here because they are the ones who need to do the work to make sure that the economy flows. Meanwhile, I have come across several sources and articles discussing how this decision is for the good and unity of the nation. Just like Biden talking about how this had to happen because of the economy. Well, the fact is, the economy couldn't handle it if the workers went on strike. That is true. But it's funny how unity only seems to be called on when the working class is the one that needs to make the sacrifice in the name of national interest. During the pandemic, how many workers went without contracts, not just in railroading, but across several different industries, and still pushed themselves in order to keep the supply chain flowing, under conditions where they were putting their lives at risk, often without hazard pay, often without any sort of care or treatment in terms of their benefits by the company. And now they are fighting uphill battles against corporations who don't even want to share the massive profits and gains that they made during that very same pandemic. While inflation has caused prices to increase in recent years through the course of that pandemic, companies have consistently raised prices even more and price gouged people on necessary items that they need to survive. And at the same time, rent and medical costs have gone up as well. So you've got food, rent, and medicine all rising in prices at the same time that these companies are making record-breaking profits. And yet it's workers who seem to be the ones that need to make the sacrifices. Why is it always the working class who needs to sacrifice in the name of corporate profits? And that's how we describe national unity. The fact is that the railroad workers are the ones who move goods across the country. They're the ones who run the economy, not the CEOs and not the politicians. Without workers, nothing gets done, and it should be these very workers who are in charge of their own industries. But short of that reality where we find worker cooperatives where everybody is able to control the means of what they do, the least that these workers deserve is time off and to get their demands and needs met so that they can go do the things that they need to do, so that they can have a proper quality of life and have a schedule that actually meets their needs, so that they could take a day off when they're sick, so that they could plan to go to a wedding or funeral if one were to happen or occur. It's common sense, and it should be the obvious choice for everyone involved. And despite the unions having this union activity declared illegal, and the strike being forced into a position where it is against the law, I would like to see them at least threaten to strike anyway. Forcing people to work for a contract that they declined is involuntary servitude, and the workers still maintain the power in this situation. A strike by workers for even a single day could cause $2 billion in losses. And as far as I'm concerned, that's on the railroad companies and the politicians, who have failed to do even the bare minimum for these workers to provide them the time off that they need. Strikes that were deemed illegal historically are what have won historic victories for us, for workers everywhere. Hard-earned victories by workers throughout history have earned us things like the 40-hour work week, the 8-hour work day, and so many more standards that we hold dear to this day, and quite frankly are slowly slipping away from us as time goes on. The legal framework and a false unity and nationalism is being used as a tool to exploit people and take away their power. Railroad workers and workers across all industries should stand up against such tactics by utilizing the strength that comes from unity. So with all of that said, if you've learned something here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, leaving a comment, and as well as joining my Discord where we talk about things like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, also consider supporting me on Patreon. It goes a long way to helping me continue to produce content like this. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below. And with that said, my name is Anarchist Terra. Thank you so much for watching.